Graham Bennett didn't expect his Tuesday to start with a flat tire, a spilled thermos of lukewarm coffee, and his 5-year-old son, Henry, refusing to wear pants, but it got worse when he jogged back from preschool, drop off only to find a parking ticket fluttering on his windshield like a final insult. He rubbed his forehead, exhaled sharply, and muttered, "Just one win, please, just one." As he crouched beside his old rusted-out sedan to change the tire, a voice called out from behind him, "Excuse me, sorry, do you know where the community board is?" He turned and nearly dropped the wrench. The woman standing there was holding a stack of bright orange posters, her brown hair pulled into a low ponytail, strands escaping around her face. Her eyes were wide, warm, and full of hesitation. "The board? Yeah." He stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans. "It's around the corner, next to the bakery," she blinked. "Would you mind showing me? I have got a lot of these to put up and I don't really know the area." Graham hesitated. He was already late for his shift at the warehouse. But something about her, maybe the slight tremble in her voice or the way she hugged the posters like they meant everything, made it impossible to say no. "Sure," he said, grabbing the top few sheets from her stack. "Lead the way." She smiled, a flash of pure relief. "Thank you." "I'm Kelsey Carter, by the way." "Graham Bennett." They walked side by side and she explained as they taped up the flyers. "I'm organizing a missing pet event, like a neighborhood drive for lost animals. My dog went missing last year and I know how hard that is. I want to help others." "That's really decent of you," Graham said, smoothing a flyer against a telephone pole. "Not many people do something just because it's good." "You'd be surprised," Kelsey murmured, glancing at him. They worked for the next hour, weaving through side streets and storefronts. Graham lifted her up to reach high places. Kelsey made him laugh with her stories about growing up with 3 rescue dogs and a rabbit named Trouble. By the time they reached the last flyer, Kelsey's cheeks were flushed, and Graham's mood had lifted for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," she said, brushing her fingers against his. "You didn't have to help, but you did," he shrugged. "You needed a hand, that's all." She tilted her head. "Still, most people would have walked away." Graham looked down, scratching the back of his neck. "Well, I'm not most people." She smiled at that, soft and genuine. "What do you do, Graham?" "I work nights at a warehouse. Daytime, I'm full-time with my son." "You're a single dad?" she asked gently. "Yeah, Henry's 5. His mom left when he was 2. I've been figuring it out ever since." There was no pity in her expression, just understanding. "He's lucky to have you." Graham wasn't used to compliments, especially not from women like her, polished, kind, and out of his league. He couldn't explain it, but something about her felt familiar, like a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Before she left, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small card. "This is the info for the event. If you and Henry are free, I'd love to see you there." He took it, fingers brushing hers again. "We'll try to make it." As she walked away, Graham stared at the card like it was made of gold. He didn't know she was a millionaire. He didn't know her last name was on the Carter Foundation building downtown. All he knew was that she made a gray morning feel like something more. That night, after putting Henry to bed, Graham sat at the kitchen table, staring at the event flyer. Missing Pet Community Fair Saturday, 10 a.m. Willow Park. He hadn't taken a Saturday off in over a year. But he found himself calling his supervisor to request it. When Saturday came, Graham dressed Henry in his cleanest shirt. They arrived to a sunlit park filled with booths, music, and cheerful chaos. Kids ran around with painted faces. Volunteers handed out balloons, and there was Kelsey in jeans and a white tee, her hair pulled up, laughing with a group of teens. When she saw Graham, her eyes widened with surprise and something else, something that made his chest tighten. "You came," she said, walking up to him. "We did," Graham replied, setting Henry down. "This is Henry." Henry looked up at her. "Are you the dog lady?" Kelsey laughed. "I guess I am." She crouched to his level. "Want to help me hand out treats to the dogs?" Henry nodded eagerly. Graham watched as his son ran off with her like they were old friends. Kelsey turned back, catching his eye with a look that made his heart thump. The rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter, sun, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Kelsey kept gravitating toward him, and he didn't stop her. She introduced him to other volunteers, brought him a fresh lemonade, and at one point quietly asked, "When was the last time you did something just for you?" Graham had no answer. As the fair wound down, Henry was curled up under a table with a puppy in his lap. Graham found Kelsey sitting alone on a bench watching the sunset. He sat beside her. "You built all this?" he asked. She nodded. "With help and some luck. You said your dog went missing last year." "Yeah," she said quietly. "Her name was Ruby. I never found her. This was my way of turning that into something good." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You're amazing, you know that." She glanced at him, her voice soft. "You don't even know me." "I'd like to." Silence stretched between them, comfortable, warm. Then she smiled. "Good. Because I'd like to know you too." Graham's heart thudded. He hadn't let anyone in for years, but Kelsey didn't feel like a risk. She felt like a beginning. As the sky turned gold, she leaned her head on his shoulder. He didn't move, just closed his eyes and let himself feel it. Neither of them knew exactly what this was yet, but they both knew it was something they didn't want to let go of. The next time Graham saw Kelsey, it was pouring. He was juggling a grocery bag, Henry's backpack, and a soaked umbrella that refused to close when the sliding door to the corner pharmacy swung open, and she stepped out, shielding herself beneath a navy raincoat. Their eyes met through the downpour. "You trying to set a world record?" she asked, jogging toward him as water splashed at her feet. He looked down at the soggy bag, threatening to collapse. "Just trying to make it through the week." "Here," she said, taking the backpack from his shoulder without waiting for permission. "You look like you need a second pair of hands." "I'm starting to think I need 4, Graham said, shaking out the umbrella and finally snapping it shut. "Henry's at a friend's place for a bit. I thought I'd get dinner sorted before the storm got worse." Clearly, I miscalculated. Kelsey glanced at the gray sky overhead. "This is definitely a stay inside and make soup kind of day." "Wish I had the ingredients for soup," he muttered, lifting the ripped edge of the grocery bag for her to see. "But I'll manage." She tilted her head, then gestured toward the bakery across the street. "Come in there with me, just for a minute." "I can't really stay out too long. I need to pick up Henry in an hour." "Then give me 20 minutes, she said, already walking backward toward the bakery door. "I'll make it worth your while." He didn't have time. He didn't have the energy, but he followed her in anyway. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. It was warm, golden, and quiet. Only 2 other tables were occupied. Kelsey waved at the woman behind the counter like she knew her. "2 of the rosemary focaccias, please," she said. "And the lentil stew. Graham, trust me, it's incredible." "You come here often, I take it?" he asked, setting the battered grocery bag beside his chair. "They catered our animal shelter fundraiser last spring." "I've been obsessed since." When the food arrived, Graham blinked. The portions were generous, the aroma mouth-watering. Kelsey handed him a spoon and a piece of soft, steaming bread. "Try it," she said. "You look like someone who hasn't eaten all day." "That's because I haven't." As he took the first bite, warmth spread through his chest. "Okay, this might actually be the best thing I've tasted in years." She grinned, eyes lighting up. "Told you." "Do you always do this?" he asked between bites. "Invite strangers into bakeries and feed them soup." "You're not a stranger anymore," she said simply. "And you looked like you needed a break." He paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "How would you know that?" "Because I know what it looks like to carry too much on your own," she said, gaze steady. "And because I've been there." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Something in the way she said it told him whatever struggle she'd faced wasn't visible on the surface, but it was real. "I don't usually let people in," he said after a moment. "Not anymore." "Maybe that's why we found each other," Kelsey said, not breaking eye contact. "Because we weren't looking." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. As they walked back into the rain, she pulled her hood up and said, "Let me drive you to pick up Henry. It's only a few blocks." "Graham, your bag is falling apart, you're soaked through, and your umbrella looks like it went 12 rounds with a wind tunnel." "Let me help." He hesitated, but the warmth in her voice made it hard to argue. "All right, but just this once." Her car was sleek, black, and clearly not something you picked up secondhand. The dashboard lit up in soft blue as she started the engine, and Graham glanced around. "This is nice. Her name's Margaret," she said, patting the steering wheel. "My brother told me naming your car meant you were emotionally attached, but I say it means you're grateful." Margaret, huh, she got me through some rough months, Kelsey said with a small smile. I owe her. Graham glanced at her, surprised. Rough months, you don't seem like someone who's had too many of those. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned onto the street where Henry's friend lived. Looks can be deceiving. He didn't push, not yet. After they picked up Henry, who was thrilled to be in a cool car with buttons on the seats, Kelsey offered to drop them both off at Graham's apartment. He hesitated again, but the rain was only coming down harder, and Henry had already buckled himself in. When they pulled up to the old brick building, Kelsey didn't comment on the peeling paint or the flickering hallway light. She just turned and smiled. Thanks for the company. Thanks for the soup, Graham replied. And the rescue. She reached into the back seat and handed him a paper bag he hadn't seen her grab. There's extra stew and bread in there for later. Kelsey, just take it. Her voice was soft but firm. You don't owe me anything. I wanted to. He nodded slowly, fingers tightening around the bag. You're hard to say no to, you know that, I've been told, she said, eyes dancing. Henry waved eagerly from the other side of the window. Bye, dog lady, Kelsey laughed. Bye, Henry, Graham opened the door. The wind hit him first, then the cold. But inside, he felt warmer than he had in a long time. As the car pulled away, he watched the taillights disappear into the rain. There was something about her, something not just kind, but layered. He didn't understand it yet, but he wanted to. Back upstairs, Henry was already pulling out his toys, the stew forgotten for now. Graham placed the bag on the counter, his mind still on Kelsey, on her quiet strength. On how she noticed things most people missed. He didn't know where this was going. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid of what came next. Graham didn't expect her to show up again, not outside of the occasional text about Henry's latest drawing or an upcoming animal charity event. But Thursday afternoon, as he stepped out of the community center where Henry attended an art class, he spotted Kelsey leaning against a silver SUV, arms folded, her expression unreadable. He slowed. Everything okay? I was hoping you'd be here, she said, pushing off the car. Can we talk? Somewhere without sidewalk traffic and fluorescent lights, he glanced toward the center. Henry's got another hour. If you don't mind the park across the street, lead the way. They crossed under budding trees, the air cool but not cold. Early spring had arrived with shy sun and damp earth. Graham chose a bench near the small duck pond. Kelsey didn't sit right away. She paced once, then turned to face him. I need to ask you something, she said, and I'd rather sound reckless than regret not saying it. Graham raised an eyebrow. All right. I'm hosting a fundraiser Friday night. It's formal. Dinner, auction, the whole thing. I have a table. I want you to come. He leaned back. You want me to crash a black tie gala? No crashing. You'd be my guest. I'll take care of everything. I don't have a suit or the right shoes. Or the right anything. I already took care of that, too, he blinked. You what? I called in a favor. There's a tailor on Main Street, Marcus. He'll be expecting you tomorrow at noon. Measurements, alterations, done by Friday. Graham stared. Kelsey, That's not a small thing. She stepped closer. It's not charity, it's a night. One night, I want you there. Why? Because I'm tired of keeping my life in separate boxes, she said quietly. You're not a project, Graham, and this thing, whatever it is between us, it matters. I want you to see where I come from. I want to see how it fits with where you are. He rubbed the back of his neck, silent. I know it's a lot, she added, voice softening, but I'm not asking you to pretend, just be there. As you. He looked at her and for once didn't think about everything he couldn't give, only about what she'd just offered. All right, he said slowly. But if your friends start asking questions about the guy who parks his car with a wrench and a prayer, they won't. And if they do, I'll answer for you. The next day, Marcus blinked twice when Graham walked into the shop, then nodded like he'd been briefed by the Pentagon. Within minutes, Graham was standing on a low platform surrounded by mirrors, a measuring tape looping around his shoulders. Miss Carter said classic black, timeless, clean, no frills, Marcus said, pinning the sleeves with precision. You're her guest. That means you'll be the only person in the room who matters to her. Graham tried not to react. She say that? Marcus gave him a look through the mirror. She didn't need to. The suit was ready by 5. Marcus handed over the garment bag with a quiet warning. Try not to spill anything on it before you get there. Friday evening, Graham left Henry with his neighbor, Mrs. Walsh, who had been thrilled to babysit for the first time since her hip surgery. He brushed his shoes twice, then walked out into the cool dusk with his heart pounding like a drum. The event was at the Whitmore Hotel. Graham had passed it for years, never stepped inside. The doorman nodded without hesitation, and the lobby swallowed him in gold and glass. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers floated above velvet-covered tables. Waiters moved like shadows in black. Every guest looked like they belonged on magazine covers. And then he saw her. Kelsey stood near the stage, wearing a navy gown that shimmered like starlight, her hair swept up, her back bare. She turned just as he stepped in, and her expression shifted from composed to undone in a heartbeat. "You came," she said, crossing the room. "You asked." She stopped in front of him, her eyes scanning his face. "You look incredible. I feel like I should be guarding an embassy." She laughed, then reached out and adjusted his lapel. "You're perfect." The rest of the evening blurred around the edges. Kelsey introduced him to donors, board members, even the mayor. Graham didn't pretend to fit in. He just stood beside her, steady and unapologetic. During dinner, she leaned in. "You're doing great. I haven't spilled anything yet. You're doing more than that. You're showing up." "That's rare." Later, as the auction began, Graham wandered toward the balcony for air. The city stretched out beneath the terrace, lights flickering like constellations. Kelsey joined him a few minutes later, heels clicking softly. "I needed a break," she said. "It gets loud in there." He nodded. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 22. My parents left me the foundation. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I still don't half the time. You seem like you do." "That's the trick," she said, leaning against the railing. "Act like you know what you're doing long enough, and eventually no one questions it." He studied her. "Is that what tonight is? Acting like everything's under control?" "No," she said, turning to him. "Tonight is the first time I've been scared in a while." "Why?" "Because you're here," she said simply. "And I don't want you to walk away when this night ends." Graham didn't answer right away. Then carefully he said, "I'm not good at this, the whole showing up thing. Not when it comes to things that matter. You're here now." He looked at her, really looked. "So are you." She moved closer. "Graham," he kissed her, not because the moment felt perfect, but because it felt real, because she wasn't asking him to become anything he wasn't. Because in the middle of a world that didn't belong to him, she did. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I was hoping you'd do that. I've been thinking about it since the soup." "Next time," she said, "I'll make you something better." "There's a next time," she smiled. "Only if you want there to be." He didn't hesitate. "I do." Behind them, the ballroom lights spilled out through the open doors, but neither of them moved. The city hummed below, and for once, Graham wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. He was just there with her. Graham stood on Kelsey's front porch, holding a potted plant Henry had insisted on choosing that morning, a crooked little fern that looked like it was trying its best. The house behind him was enormous, but not flashy. There was ivy climbing one side, a porch swing that moved slowly with the wind, and the faint scent of lavender drifting in from the garden beds. He adjusted the fern's paper wrapping and rang the bell. The door swung open, and Kelsey stood there barefoot in jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair down, damp from a shower. "I forgot how tall you are," she said with a grin, stepping aside. "Come in." Graham followed her into a sun-drenched kitchen with wide windows and a long farmhouse table. Henry's voice carried from the next room, where he was building something elaborate out of blocks with a golden retriever circling him like a sentry. "He named her Pancake," Kelsey said. "I tried to suggest something dignified, but he was firm." "He's been talking about her non-stop," Graham said, setting the fern on the table. "Said she understands his engineering vision." Kelsey laughed and poured him a glass of iced tea. "That plant have a name too?" "Not yet." "I figured you'd want to handle that part." He said it looked like it needed some love. She touched one of the leaves gently. "He's not wrong." They sat at the table, the late afternoon light filtering through the windows. Graham took in the space books stacked on side tables, a violin case half open near the fireplace, and a photo of Kelsey with two much older men in front of what looked like a cabin. "My uncles," she said, following his gaze. "They raised me after my dad passed." "That cabin was theirs. What happened to it?" I still have it. Go there when I need to breathe. Haven't been in a while. Why not? Too much noise, she said. Not enough time. He studied her. You don't seem like someone who lets time push her around. I don't usually. She looked down at her glass. But things changed after Ruby disappeared. I stopped going places that reminded me of what I lost. He didn't speak, just listened. She glanced at him. You know, I used to think money made things easier. It doesn't. It just makes your walls higher and the silence louder. He leaned back, arms folded. You ever wish you could just walk away from it? Not from the work, she said, but from the expectations, sometimes. It's like I'm always performing. Except with you and Henry, it's just quiet, good quiet, the kind I didn't know I missed. They sat in the silence for a moment, listening to Henry's muffled instructions to Pancake in the other room. Then Kelsey said, I've been thinking about something. Yeah, I want to open another shelter, a permanent one, not just pop-up events or drives, something lasting, but I don't want it under the Carter name. He frowned slightly. Why not? Because I don't want people to support it because of me. I want it to stand on its own, to belong to the people who need it. Graham nodded slowly. So what do you need from me? I don't need anything, she said, eyes steady, but I'd like your help. You've got instincts most people don't. You see people, that's rare. I don't know anything about building shelters. You didn't know anything about art classes or soup that night either. He huffed out a breath. You're really not gonna let me stay in my comfort zone, are you? Not a chance. Pancake came bounding into the kitchen, Henry trailing behind her, arms full of blueprints made out of printer paper and tape. Dad, look, he said, dropping them on the floor. It's the shelter. I made the lobby bigger this time, so the dogs don't feel squished. Kelsey knelt beside him. This is perfect. Can I use your design when I build it? His eyes widened. Really? Absolutely. Graham watched as Henry beamed, then flung his arms around her. She hugged him back without hesitation, her hand resting gently on his back. Later, after Henry had fallen asleep in the guest room with Pancake curled at his feet, Graham stepped out onto the back patio. The sky was deep blue, streaked with silver clouds. Kelsey joined him, 2 mugs in her hands. I made decaf, she said, handing him one. Didn't want you wide awake at 2 in the morning. He took it, nodding his thanks. They stood in silence, watching the wind stir the trees. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Every day. And I keep thinking it's gotta stop being this hard eventually. She looked up at him. What if it doesn't? What if it's just life? Then I guess we find the people who make it easier to carry. She leaned against the railing. You've made space in my life I didn't know I needed, and not just for me, for Henry, for this house, for everything. Kelsey, I'm not asking you to move in or make promises. I just need you to know I don't care what you have. I care who you are. He set down the mug and turned to her. I've spent years trying to prove I'm enough, for Henry, for myself. I never thought I'd meet someone who didn't ask me to be more. You don't have to be more, she said. You already are. He reached for her hand. So what now? You tell me. He drew her into him, wrapping his arms around her as the wind swept through the trees. She fit against him like the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't realized was incomplete. We build the shelter, he said quietly. We show up. We figure it out, she smiled against his chest. Together. Yeah, he said. Together. The night stretched around them, full of quiet promises and the kind of peace neither of them had known they needed until now. The wind carried the scent of cedar and rain as Graham stepped out of the car with Henry, who was craning his neck to get a better look at the sprawling property ahead. Tucked between evergreens and low stone walls, the new shelter site stretched across 3 peaceful acres. The road had been repaved, the fencing was halfway up, and the foundation was already poured. Kelsey stood near the construction trailer, clipboard in hand, talking to 2 workers in reflective vests. She turned at the sound of the car door shutting, her face breaking into something Graham hadn't seen before, relief threaded with anticipation. Henry sprinted toward her, arms flailing in excitement. Is that the lobby I drew? Kelsey crouched, pulling him into a hug. That's exactly it. We scaled it up a little, but the shape is all yours. Graham watched them quietly, hands in his jacket pockets. The past few weeks had been a blur of planning meetings, late-night design tweaks, and long conversations that ranged from water pressure systems to what kind of tiles would feel warm under a dog's paws during winter. Somehow, amid blueprints and logistics, they'd settled into something steady. Not easy but real, Kelsey straightened, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. They're ahead of schedule. We could be open by early fall. He walked over, taking in the view of the half-framed building. You really did it. We did it. She handed him a set of keys. The small building out back, that's the community room. I thought maybe you could run workshops there on weekends. For kids, or anyone who wants to learn how to care for animals. Graham took the keys slowly, turning them over in his palm. You're serious. I've never been more serious. He looked at her, then at Henry, now busy pointing out where the play area should go to a confused electrician, and something in his chest shifted. You know, all this time I thought I was just getting by, but this feels like building something. That's because it is. I used to think I couldn't give Henry more than just getting through the day, he said quietly. But now he's got a dog, a place to run wild, and a woman who actually listens to his ideas. Kelsey stepped closer. And he's got a father who never gave up on him. That matters more than anything I could ever give. He touched her cheek, thumbs skimming her jaw. You're not what I expected. You either, she whispered. Which is probably why this works. They didn't kiss, not yet, but the way they looked at each other said everything. Later that evening, back at Graham's apartment, the last cardboard box was taped shut. The living room was bare except for the sleeping bag Henry had insisted on using just one last time. Pancake was curled at his feet, snoring softly. Kelsey dried her hands on a dish towel after rinsing the last coffee mug. You sure about this? He leaned against the counter. You offered us a place to stay while the shelter gets finished. You even gave Henry the room with the big window. I meant more than just the house, she said, watching him. So did I. She stepped into his space, her hand resting lightly on his chest. Graham, this isn't temporary for me. You're not a guest, you're part of this. His voice was low, steady. I've never had someone want me without conditions. Well, I do, she said. You, Henry, Pancake, all of it. He bent his head and kissed her slow, purposeful, the kind of kiss that felt like a vow. She melted into him, fingers tangling in his shirt, and kissed him back like she'd been waiting her whole life to feel this sure. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I love you. I love you too, he said, no hesitation. The next morning, they packed the last of Henry's drawings and headed to the house together. The furniture truck arrived just after noon, and by sundown, Graham had assembled Henry's bed while Kelsey arranged a bouquet of fresh sunflowers in the kitchen window. That night, they sat together on the back porch, Henry asleep upstairs, Pancake sprawled across the rug inside. You know what I was most afraid of when we started this? Kelsey asked. He turned to her. What? That I'd have to choose between the life I built and the life I wanted. And now, I realize they're the same thing, she said, because you're in it. He took her hand, lacing their fingers. Then let's make a life neither of us has to escape from. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Sounds like forever to me. 5 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, the shelter opened its doors to a flood of wagging tails, curious families, and one very proud little boy wearing a volunteer badge that read Lead Architect. Graham stood beside Kelsey at the ribbon cutting, Henry between them, Pancake at their feet. The mayor gave a short speech, but it was Kelsey's words that brought the crowd to silence. This shelter isn't just for animals, she said, voice steady. It's for anyone who's ever felt lost or forgotten or like they didn't belong. This is a place to be found. As the crowd applauded, she reached for Graham's hand. He squeezed it and she looked up, eyes shining. After the ceremony, they walked through the building together, past kennels filled with blankets and toys, past the community room lined with shelves of books and quiet corners. Graham caught sight of Henry showing a younger girl how to hold a leash properly. He's changed, Kelsey said softly. He's happy, Graham replied. That's all I ever wanted. They paused at the back entrance where the sun spilled across the gravel path leading into the woods. Kelsey turned to him. I want to get married here, she said, almost breathless. In the community room, casual, small. Just the people who matter. He didn't answer right away. He just pulled her into a kiss that said yes, absolutely, without question. 3 weeks later, they exchanged vows in front of 20 people, Henry grinning from ear to ear as he walked pancake down the aisle. Kelsey wore a simple cream dress, hair loose, cheeks flushed with joy. Graham wore the same black suit Marcus had tailored for the gala, this time with a white rose tucked in the pocket. Afterward, they danced beneath string lights wrapped around the porch beams. Henry fell asleep in a hammock before the cake was even cut. They didn't leave for a honeymoon they didn't have to. Home was right there, full of love and laughter and second chances. And as they stood together under the stars, arms wrapped tight, the world quiet around them, Graham whispered, "I never thought this life could be mine." Kelsey leaned into him, smiling against his neck. "It always could, you just had to believe it." "I do," he said. "I do," and he meant it. Every word, every moment, every heartbeat. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't surviving, he was in love, and finally, he was home.